Chapter 61 of Pushing to the Front by Orison Swett Marden. Chapter 61. Thrift. Money a mickle makes a muckle. Scotch proverb. A penny saved is a penny earned. English saying. Beware of little extravagances. A small leak will sink a big ship. Franklin. No gain is more certain than that which proceeds from the economical use of what we have. Latin proverb. Make all you can, save all you can, give all you can. John Wesley. All fortunes have their foundation laid in economy. J. G. Holland. In the philosophy of thrift, the unit measure of prosperity is always the smallest of coins current. Thrift is measured not by the pound, but by the penny, not by the dollar, but by the cent. Thus, any person in receipt of an income or salary, however small, finds it in his power to practice thrift and to lay the foundation of prosperity. The word thrift in its origin means the grasping or holding fast the things that we have. It implies economy, carefulness, as opposed to waste and extravagance. It involves self-denial and frugal living for the time being, until the prosperity which grows out of thrift permits the more liberal indulgence of natural desires. One of the primary elements of thrift is to spend less than you earn, to save something, however small, from the salary received, to lay aside at regular intervals, when possible, some part of the money earned or made, in provision for the future. Every boy should realize, in starting out, that he can never accumulate money until he acquires the habit of saving, said Russell Sage. Even if he can save only a few cents at the beginning, it is better than saving nothing at all. And he will find, as the months go on, that it becomes easier for him to lay by a part of his earnings. It is surprising how fast an account in a savings bank can be made to grow, and the boy who starts one and keeps it up stands a good chance of enjoying a prosperous old age. Some people who spend every cent of their income on their living expenses are always bewailing the fact that they have never become rich. They pick out some man who is known to have made a fortune and speak of him as being lucky. There is practically no such thing as luck in business, and the boy who depends upon it to carry him through is very likely not to get through at all. The men who have made a success of their lives are men who started out bright when they were boys. They studied while at school, and when they went to work, they didn't expect to be paid wages for loafing half the time. They weren't always on the lookout for an easy snap, and they forged ahead, not waiting always for the opportunities that never came, and bewailing the supposed fact that times are no longer what they used to be. A young man may have many friends, said Sir Thomas Lipton, but he will find none so steadfast, so constant, so ready to respond to his wants, so capable of pushing him ahead, as a little leather-covered book with the name of a bank on the cover. Saving is the first great principle of success. It creates independence. It gives a young man standing. It fills him with vigor. It stimulates him with proper energy. In fact, it brings to him the best part of any success, happiness and contentment. It is estimated that if a man will begin at 20 years of age to lay by 26 cents every working day, investing at 7% compound interest, he will at 70 years of age have amassed $32,000. Economy is wealth. This proverb has been repeated to most of us, until we are either tired of it or careless of it. But it is well to remember that a saying becomes a proverb because of its truth and significance. Many a man has proved that if economy is not actual wealth, it is, in many cases, potentially so. Professor Marshall, the noted English economist, estimates that $500 million is spent annually by the British working class for things that do nothing to make their lives nobler or happier. At a meeting of the British Association, the President, in an address to the economic section, expressed his belief that the simple item of food waste alone would justify the above-mentioned estimate. One potent cause of waste today is that very many of the women do not know how to buy economically, and are neither passable cooks nor good housekeepers. Edward Atkinson estimated that in the United States, the waste from bad cooking alone is over $100 million a year. Provided he has some ability and good sense to start with, is thrifty, honest, and economical, said Philip D. Armour. There is no reason why any young man should not accumulate money and attain so-called success in life. When asked to what qualities he attributed his own success, Mr. Armour said, "I think that thrift and economy had much to do with it. I owe much to my mother's training and to a good line of Scotch ancestors who have always been thrifty and economical." A young man should cultivate the habit of always saving something, said the late Marshall Field. However small his income, it was by living up to this principle that Mr. Field became the richest and most successful merchant in the world. When asked by an interviewer, whom I sent to him on one occasion, what he considered the turning point in his career, he answered, "Saving the first $5,000 I ever had, when I might just as well have spent the modest salary I made. Possession of that sum, once I had it, gave me the ability to meet opportunities. That I consider the turning point." The first savings prove the turning point in many a young man's career. But it is true that the lack of thrift is one of the greatest curses of modern civilization. Extravagance, ostentatious display, a desire to outshine others, is a vice of our age, and especially of our country. Someone has said that investigation would place at the head of the list of the cause of poverty wastefulness inherited from wasteful parents. "If you know how to spend less than you get," said Franklin, "you have the philosopher's stone." The great trouble with many young people is that they do not acquire the saving habit at the start, and never find the philosopher's stone. They don't learn to spend less than they get. If they learned that lesson in time, they would have little difficulty in making themselves independent. It is this first saving that counts. John Jacob Astor said it cost him more to get the first $1,000 than it did afterwards to get 100,000. But if he had not saved the first 1,000, he would have died poor. "The first thing that a man should learn to do," says Andrew Carnegie, "is to save his money. By saving his money he promotes thrift, the most valued of all habits. Thrift is the great fortune maker. It draws the line between the savage and the civilized man. Thrift not only develops the fortune, but it develops also the man's character. The savings bank is one of the greatest encouragements to thrift, because it pays a premium on deposits in the form of interest on savings. One of the greatest benefits ever extended by this government to its citizens is the opening of postal savings banks where money can be deposited with absolute security against loss, because the federal government would have to fail before the bank could fail. The economies which enable a man to start a savings account are not usually pinching economies, not the stinting of the necessaries of life, but merely the foregoing of selfish pleasures and indulgences, which not only drain the purse, but sap the physical strength and undermine the health of brain and body. The majority of people do not even try to practice self-control, are not willing to sacrifice present enjoyment, ease, for larger future good. They spend their money at the time for transient gratification, for the pleasure of the moment, with little thought for tomorrow, and then they envy others who are more successful and wonder why they do not get on better themselves. They store up neither money nor knowledge for the future. The squirrels know that it will not always be summer. They store food for the winter, which their instinct tells them is coming. But multitudes of human beings store nothing, consume everything as they go along, so that when sickness or old age come, there is no reserve, nothing to fall back on. They have sacrificed their future for the present. The facility with which loose change slips away from these people is most insidious and unaccountable. I know young men who spend more for unnecessary things, what they call incidentals, cigars, drinks, all sorts of sweets, soda water and knickknacks of various kinds, than for their essentials, board, clothes, rooms. Then they wonder where all their money goes to, as they never keep any account of it, and rarely restrain a desire. They do not realize it when they fling out a nickel here and a dime there, pay a quarter for this and a quarter for that. But in a week it counts up, and in a year it amounts to a large sum. "He never lays up a cent" is an expression which we hear every day regarding those who earn enough to enable them to save a competence. A short time ago, a young man in New York complained to a friend of poverty and his inability to save money. "How much do you spend for luxuries?" asked the friend. "Luxuries?" answered the young man. "If by luxuries you mean cigars and a few drinks, I don't average, including an occasional cigar or a glass of light wine for a friend, over $6 a week. Most of the boys spend more, but I make it a rule to be moderate in my expenditures. 10 years ago," declared the friend, "I was spending about the same every week for the same things, and paying $30 a month for 5 inconvenient rooms up 4 flights of stairs. I had just married then, and one day I told my wife that I longed to have her in a place befitting her needs and refinement. 'John,' was her reply, 'if you love me well enough to give up 2 things which are not only useless but extremely harmful to you, we can, for what those things alone cost, own a pretty home in 10 years.' She sat down by me with a pencil and paper, and in less than 5 minutes had demonstrated that she was right. You dined with me in the suburbs the other day, and spoke of the beauty and convenience of our cottage. That cottage cost $3,000, and every dollar of it was my former cigar and drink money. But I gained more than a happy wife and pretty home by saving. I gained self-control, better health, self-respect, a truer manhood, a more permanent happiness. I desire every young man who is trying to secure pleasure through smoking and drinking, whether moderately or immoderately, to make use of his judgment and pencil and paper, and see if he is not forfeiting in a number of directions far more than he is gaining. There is an impressive fact in the gospel story of the prodigal son. The statement, "He wasted his substance in riotous living," means more than that he wasted his funds. It implies that he wasted himself. And the most serious phase of all waste is not the waste of substance, but the waste of self, of one's energy, capital, the lowering of morals, the undermining of character, the loss of self-respect which thrift encourages and promotes. Thrift is not only one of the foundation stones of a fortune, but also one of character. The habit of thrift improves the quality of the character. The saving of money usually means the saving of a man. It means cutting off indulgences or avoiding vicious habits which are ruinous. It often means health in the place of dissipation. It often means a clear instead of a cloudy and muddled brain. Furthermore, the saving habit indicates an ambition to get on and up in the world. It develops a spirit of independence, of self-reliance. A little bank account or an insurance policy indicates a desire to improve one's condition, to look up in life. It means hope, it means ambition, a determination to make good. People believe in the young man who, without being mean or penurious, saves a part of his income. It is an indication of many sterling qualities. Businessmen naturally reason that if a young man is saving his money, he is also saving his energy, his vitality from being wasted, that he is looking up in the world and not down, that he is long-headed, wise, that he is determined not to sacrifice the larger gain of the future for the gratification of the hour. A snug little bank account will add to your self-respect and self-confidence, because it shows that you have practicability, a little more independence. You can look the world in the face with a little more assurance. You can stand a little more erect and face the future with more confidence, if you know that there stands between yourself and want a little ready money or a safe investment of some kind. The very consciousness that there is something back of you that will prove a barrier to the wolf which haunts so many human beings, and which is a terror and an efficiency destroyer to so many, will strengthen and buttress you at every point. It will relieve you from worry and anxiety about the future. It will unlock your faculties, release them from the restraint and suppression which uncertainty, fear, and doubt impose, and leave you free to do your best work. Another great aid and incentive to thrift is the life insurance policy. Primarily devised for the support of widows and orphans, life insurance practice has been developed so as to include the secure investment of surplus earnings in conjunction with the insurance of a sum payable at death. I am a great believer in the efficiency of savings banks as character builders, but life insurance has some greater advantages, especially in furnishing that imperious must, that spur of necessity so important as a motive to most people. People can put money into savings banks when they get it, provided some stronger desire does not overcome the inclination, but they feel that they must pay their insurance premium. Then again, money obtainable just by signing the name is so easily withdrawn for spending in all sorts of ways. This is one reason why I often recommend life insurance to young people as a means of saving. It has been of untold value as an object lesson of the tremendous possibilities in acquiring the saving habit. I believe that life insurance is doing a great deal to induce the habit of saving. When a young man on a salary or a definite income takes out an insurance policy, he has a definite aim. He has made up his mind positively to save so much money every year from his income to pay his premium. Then it is easier for him to say no to the 101 alluring temptations to spend his money for this and that. He can say no, then, with emphasis, because he knows he must keep up his insurance. An insurance policy has often changed the habits of an entire family from thriftlessness and spendthrift tendencies to thrift and order. The very fact that a certain amount must be saved from the income every week, or every month, or every year, has often developed the faculty of prudence and economy of the entire household. Everybody is cautioned to be careful because the premium must be paid, and oftentimes it is the first sign of a program or order, system in the home. The consciousness of a sacred obligation to make payments on that which means protection for those dear to you often shuts out a great deal of foolishness and cuts out a lot of temptation to spend money for self-gratification and to cater to one's weak tendencies. The life insurance policy has thus proved to be a character insurance as well, an insurance against silly expenditures, an insurance against one's own weak willpower or vicious weak tendencies, a real protection against one's self, one's real enemy. Among the sworn enemies of thrift may be named going into debt, borrowing money, keeping no itemized account of daily expenditures, and buying on the installment plan. That great English preacher Spurgeon said that debt, dirt, and the devil make up the trinity of evil. And debt can discount the devil at any time for possibilities of present personal torment. The temptations to go into debt are increasing rapidly. On every hand in the cities one may read such advertisements as, "We trust you. Your credit is good with us." And with these statements come offers of clothing, furniture, and what not on easy payments. But as the Irishman remarked after an experience with the installment purchase of furniture, "On easy payments they sure are. As a matter of fact, the easy payments take all the ease and comfort out of life. They are easy only for the man who receives them." Beware of the delusions of buying on the installment plan. There are thousands of poor families in this country who buy organs and sets of books and encyclopedias, lightning rods, farming implements, and all sorts of things which they might get along without, because they can pay for them a little at a time. In this way they keep themselves poor. They are always pinching, sacrificing, to save up for the agent when he comes around to collect. All through the South there are poor homes of both colored and white families, where there are not sufficient cooking utensils and knives, forks and spoons, to enable the members to eat with comfort, and yet you will find expensive things in their homes which they have bought on the installment plan, and which keep them poor for years trying to pay for them. As far as borrowing money is concerned, the bitter experience of countless men and women is crystallized in that old saying, "He that goes a borrowing goes a sorrowing." There is a world of safety for the man who follows Shakespeare's advice, "Neither a borrower nor a lender be." It is sometimes said flippantly that poverty is no disgrace, but it's mighty uncomfortable. And yet poverty is often a real disgrace. People born to poverty may rise above it. People who have poverty thrust upon them may overcome it. In this great land of abundance and opportunity, poverty is in most cases a disgrace and a reproach. Dr. Johnson said to Boswell, "I admonish you avoid poverty, the temptation and worry it breeds." There is something humiliating in being poor. The very consciousness that we have nothing to show for our endeavor, besides a little character and the little we have done, is anything but encouraging. Somehow we feel that we have not amounted to much, and we know the world looks upon us in the same way if we have not managed to accumulate something. It is a reflection upon our business ability, upon our judgment, upon our industry, It is not so much for the money as for what it means to have earned and saved money. It is the idea of thrift. If we have not been thrifty, if we have not saved anything, the world will look upon us as good for nothing, as partial failures, as either lazy, slipshod, or extravagant. They regard us as either not having been able to make money, or if we have, not being able to save it. But let it be remembered that thrift is not parsimony, not miserliness. It often means very liberal spending. It is a perpetual protest against putting the emphasis on the wrong thing. No one should make the mistake of economizing to the extent of planting seeds, and then denying liberal nourishment to the plants that grow from them, of conducting business without advertising, or of saving a little extra expense by pinching on one's table or dress. A dollar saved is a dollar earned, but a dollar spent well and liberally is often several dollars earned. A dollar saved is often very many dollars lost. The progressive, generous spirit nowadays will leave far behind the plodder that devotes time to adding pennies that could be given to making dollars. The only value a dollar has is its buying power. No matter how many times it has been spent, it is still good. Hoarded money is of no more use than gold so inaccessible in old Mother Earth that it will never feel the miner's pick. There is plenty in this world, if we keep it moving and keep moving after it. Imagine everybody in the world stingy, living on the principle of, "We can do without that," or "Our grandfathers got along without such things, and I guess I can." What would become of our parks, grand buildings, electrical improvements, of music and art? What would become of labor that nurses a tree from a forest to a piano or a palace car? What would become of those dependent upon the finished work? What would happen, what panic would follow, if everybody turned stingy, is indefinable. So apportion your wants that your means may exceed them, said Bulwer. With £100 a year, I may need no man's help. I may at least have my crust of bread and liberty. But with £5,000 a year, I may dread a ring at my bell. I may have my tyrannical master in servants whose wages I cannot pay. My exile may be at the fiat of the first long-suffering man who enters judgment against me. For the flesh that lies nearest my heart, some Shylock may be dusting his scales and whetting his knife. Every man is needy who spends more than he has. No man is needy who spends less. I may so ill manage that with 5,000 a year I purchase the worst evils of poverty, terror and shame. I may so well manage my money that with £100 a year I purchase the best blessings of wealth, safety and respect. End of Chapter 61. Thrift. Chapter 62 of Pushing to the Front by Orison Swett Marden. Chapter 62. A College Education at Home. Tumbling around in a library was the phrase Oliver Wendell Holmes used in describing in part his felicities in boyhood. One of the most important things that wise students get out of their school days is a familiarity with books in various departments of learning. The ability to pick out from a library what is needed in life is of the greatest practical value. It is like a man selecting his tools for intellectual expansion and social service. Men in every department of practical life, says President Hadley of Yale, men in commerce, in transportation, or in manufactures, have told me that what they really wanted from our colleges was men who have this selective power of using books efficiently. The beginnings of this kind of knowledge are best learned in any home fairly well furnished with books. Libraries are no longer a luxury, but a necessity. A home without books and periodicals and newspapers is like a house without windows. Children learn to read by being in the midst of books. They unconsciously absorb knowledge by handling them. No family can now afford to be without good reading. Children who are well supplied with dictionaries, encyclopedias, histories, works of reference, and other useful books will educate themselves unconsciously, and almost without expense, and will learn many things of their own accord in moments which would otherwise be wasted, and which, if learned in schools, academies, or colleges, would cost 10 times as much as the expense of the books would be. Besides, homes are brightened and made attractive by good books, and children stay in such pleasant homes, while those whose education has been neglected are anxious to get away from home, and drift off and fall into all manner of snares and dangers. It is astonishing how much a bright child will absorb from being brought up in the atmosphere of good books, being allowed to constantly use them, to handle them, to be familiar with their bindings and titles. It is a great thing for children to be brought up in the atmosphere of books. Many people never make a mark on a book, never bend down a leaf or underscore a choice passage. Their libraries are just as clean as the day they bought them, and, often, their minds are just about as clean of information. Don't be afraid to mark your books. Make notes in them. They will be all the more valuable. One who learns to use his books in early life grows up with an increasing power for effective usefulness. It is related that Henry Clay's mother furnished him with books by her own earnings at the washtub. Wear threadbare clothes and patched shoes if necessary, but do not pinch or economize on books. If you cannot give your children an academic education, you can place within their reach a few good books, which will lift them above their surroundings into respectability and honor. Is not one's early home the place where he should get his principal training for life? It is here we form habits which shape our careers and which cling to us as long as we live. It is here that regular, persistent mental training should fix the life ever after. I know of pitiable cases where ambitious boys and girls have longed to improve themselves, and yet were prevented from doing so by the pernicious habits prevailing in the home, where everybody else spent the evenings talking and joking, with no effort at self-improvement, no thought of higher ideals, no impulse to read anything better than a cheap, exciting story. The aspiring members of the family were teased and laughed at until they got discouraged and gave up the struggle. If the younger ones do not want to read or study themselves, they will not let anybody else so inclined do so. Children are naturally mischievous, and like to tease. They are selfish too, and cannot understand why anyone else should want to go off by himself to read or study when they want him to play. Were the self-improvement habit once well established in a home, it would become a delight. The young people would look forward to the study hour with as much anticipation as to playing. Were it possible for every family that squanders precious time to spend an evening in such a home, it would be an inspiration. A bright, alert, intelligent, harmonious atmosphere so pervades a self-improving home that one feels insensibly uplifted and stimulated to better things. I know a New England family in which all the children and the father and mother, by mutual consent, set aside a portion of each evening for study or some form of self-culture. After dinner, They give themselves completely to recreation. They have a regular romp and play, and all the fun possible for an hour. Then when the time comes for study, the entire house becomes so still that you could hear a pin drop. Everyone is in his place reading, writing, studying, or engaging in some form of mental work. No one is allowed to speak or disturb anyone else. If any member of the family is indisposed, or for any reason does not feel like working, he must at least keep quiet and not disturb the others. There is perfect harmony and unity of purpose, an ideal condition for study. Everything that would scatter the efforts or cause the mind to wander, all interruptions that would break the continuity of thought, is carefully guarded against. More is gained in 1 hour of close, uninterrupted study than in 2 or 3 broken by many interruptions, or weakened by mind wandering. Sometimes the habits of a home are revolutionized by the influence of one resolute youth who declares himself, taking a stand and announcing that, as for himself, he does not propose to be a failure, that he is going to take no chances as to his future. The moment he does this, he stands out in strong contrast with the great mass of young people who are throwing away their opportunities and have not grit and stamina enough to do anything worthwhile. The very reputation of always trying to improve yourself in every possible way, of being dead in earnest, will attract the attention of everybody who knows you, and you will get many a recommendation for promotion which never comes to those who make no special effort to climb upward. There is a great deal of time wasted even in the busiest lives, which, if properly organized, might be used to advantage. Many housewives, who are so busy from morning to night that they really believe they have no time for reading books, magazines, or newspapers, would be amazed to find how much they would have if they would more thoroughly systematize their work. Order is a great time saver, and we certainly ought to be able to so adjust our living plan that we can have a fair amount of time for self-improvement, for enlarging life. Yet many people think that their only opportunity for self-improvement depends upon the time left after everything else has been attended to. What would a businessman accomplish if he did not attend to important matters until he had time that was not needed for anything else? The good businessman goes to his office in the morning and plunges right into the important work of the day. He knows perfectly well that if he attends to all the outside matters, all the details and little things that come up, sees everybody that wants to see him, and answers all the questions people want to ask, that it will be time to close his office before he gets to his main business. Most of us manage somehow to find time for the things we love. If one is hungry for knowledge, if one yearns for self-improvement, if one has a taste for reading, he will make the opportunity. Where the heart is, there is the treasure. Where the ambition is, there is time. It takes not only resolution, but also determination to set aside unessentials for essentials, things pleasant and agreeable today for the things that will prove best for us in the end. There is always temptation to sacrifice future good for present pleasure, to put off reading to a more convenient season, while we enjoy idle amusements, or waste the time in gossip or frivolous conversation. The greatest things of the world have been done by those who systematized their work, organized their time. Men who have left their mark on the world have appreciated the preciousness of time, regarding it as the great quarry. If you want to develop a delightful form of enjoyment, to cultivate a new pleasure, a new sensation which you have never before experienced, begin to read good books, good periodicals, regularly, every day. Do not tire yourself by trying to read a great deal at first. Read a little at a time, but read some every day, no matter how little. If you are faithful, you will soon acquire a taste for reading, the reading habit, and it will in time give you infinite satisfaction, unalloyed pleasure. In a gym, one often sees lax, listless people who, instead of pursuing a systematic course of training to develop all the muscles of the body, flit aimlessly from one thing to another, exercising with pulley weights for a minute or two, taking up dumbbells and throwing them down, swinging once or twice on parallel bars, and so frittering away time and strength. Far better it would be for such people to stay away from a gymnasium altogether, for their lack of purpose and continuity makes them lose rather than gain muscular energy. A man or woman who would gather strength from gymnastic exercise must set about it systematically and with a will. He must put mind and energy into the work, or else continue to have flabby muscles and an undeveloped body. The physical gymnasium differs only in kind from the mental one. Thoroughness and system are as necessary in one as in the other. It is not the taster of books, not those who sip here and there, who take up one book after another, turn the leaves listlessly, and hurry to the end, who strengthen and develop the mind by reading. To get the most from your reading, you must read with a purpose. To sit down and pick up a book listlessly, with no aim except to pass away time, is demoralizing. It is much as if an employer were to hire a boy and tell him he could start when he pleased in the morning, work when he felt like it, rest when he wanted to, and quit when he got tired. Never go to a book you wish to read for a purpose, if you can possibly avoid it, with a tired, jaded mentality. If you do, you will get the same in kind from it. Go to it fresh, vigorous, and with active, never passive, faculties. This practice is a splendid and effective cure for mind wandering, which afflicts so many people, and which is encouraged by the multiplicity of and facility of obtaining reading matter at the present day. What can give greater satisfaction than reading with a purpose, and that consciousness of a broadening mind that follows it, and growth, of expansion, of enriching the life, the consciousness that we are pushing ignorance, bigotry, and whatever clouds the mind and hampers progress a little further away from us. The kind of reading that counts, that makes mental fiber and stamina, is that upon which the mind is concentrated, approaching a book with all one's soul intent upon its contents. How few people ever learn to concentrate their attention. Most of us waste a vast amount of precious time, dawdling and idling. We sit or stand over our work without thinking. Our minds are blank much of the time. Passive reading is even more harmful in its effects than desultory reading. It no more strengthens the brain than sitting down in a gymnasium develops the body. The mind remains inactive, in a sort of indolent reverie, wandering here and there without focusing anywhere. Such reading takes the spring and snap out of the mental faculties, weakens the intellect, and makes the brain torpid and incapable of grappling with great principles and difficult problems. What you get out of a book is not necessarily what the author puts into it, but what you bring to it. If the heart does not lead the head, if the thirst for knowledge, the hunger for a broader and deeper culture, are not the motives for reading, you will not get the most out of a book. But if your thirsty soul drinks in the writer's thought as the parched soil absorbs rain, then your latent possibilities and the potency of your being, like delayed germs and seeds in the soil, will spring forth into new life. When you read, read as Macaulay did, as Carlyle did, as Lincoln did, as did every man who has profited by his reading, with your whole soul absorbed in what you read, with such intense concentration that you will be oblivious of everything else outside of your book. Reading furnishes us only with the materials of knowledge, said John Locke. It is thinking that makes what we read ours. In order to get the most out of books, the reader must be a thinker. The mere acquisition of facts is not the acquisition of power. To fill the mind with knowledge that cannot be made available is like filling our houses with furniture and bric-a-brac until we have no room to move about. Food does not become physical force, brain, or muscle until it has been thoroughly digested and assimilated, and has become an integral part of the blood, brain, and other tissues. Knowledge does not become power until digested and assimilated by the brain, until it has become a part of the mind itself. If you wish to become intellectually strong, after reading with the closest attention, form this habit. Frequently close your book and sit and think, or stand and walk and think. But think, contemplate, reflect. Turn what you have read over and over in your mind. It is not yours until you have assimilated it by your thought. When you first read it, it belongs to the author. It is yours only when it becomes an integral part of you. Many people have an idea that if they keep reading everlastingly, if they always have a book in their hands at every leisure moment, they will of necessity become full-rounded and well-educated. But they might just as well expect to become athletes by eating at every opportunity. It is even more necessary to think than to read. Thinking, contemplating what we have read, is what digestion and assimilation are to the food. Some of the biggest fools I know are always cramming themselves with knowledge, but they never think. When they get a few minutes leisure, they grab a book and go to reading. In other words, they are always eating intellectually, but never digesting their knowledge or assimilating it. I know a young man who has formed such a habit of reading that he is almost never without a book, a magazine, or a paper. He is always reading at home, on the cars, at the railway stations, and he has acquired a vast amount of knowledge. He has a perfect passion for knowledge, and yet his mind seems to have been weakened by this perpetual brain stuffing. By every reader, let Milton's words be borne in mind. Who reads incessantly, and to his reading brings not a spirit and judgment equal or superior, uncertain and unsettled still remains, deep versed in books and shallow in himself, crude or intoxicate, collecting toys and trifles for choice matters, worth a sponge, as children gathering pebbles on the shore. When Webster was a boy, books were scarce, and so precious that he never dreamed that they were to be read only once, but thought they ought to be committed to memory, or read and reread until they became a part of his very life. Elizabeth Barrett Browning says, "We err by reading too much, and out of proportion to what we think. I should be wiser, I am persuaded, if I had not read half as much, should have had stronger and better exercised faculties, and should stand higher in my own appreciation. Those who live more quietly do not have so many distracting influences, and consequently think more deeply and reflect more than others. They do not read so much, but they are better readers. You should bring your mind to the reading of a book, or to the study of any subject, as you take an axe to the grindstone, not for what you get from the stone, but for the sharpening of the axe. The greatest advantage of books does not always come from what we remember of them, but from their suggestiveness, their character-building power. It is not in the library, but in yourself," says Friar Gregory. "In your self-respect and your consciousness of duty, noble done, that you are to find the fountain of youth, the elixir of life, and all the other things that tend to preserve life's freshness and bloom." It is a grand thing to read a good book. It is a grander thing to live a good life. And in the living of such a life is generated the power that defies age and its decadence. It is not the ability, the education, the knowledge that one has that makes the difference between men. The mere possession of knowledge is not always the possession of power. Knowledge which has not become a part of yourself, knowledge which cannot swing into line in an emergency, is of little use and will not save you at the critical moment. To be effective, a man's education must become a part of himself as he goes along. All of it must be worked up into power. A little practical education that has become a part of one's being and is always available will accomplish more in the world than knowledge far more extensive that cannot be utilized. No one better illustrates what books will do for a man, and what a thinker will do with his books, than Gladstone, who was always far greater than his career. He rose above Parliament, reached out beyond politics, and was always growing. He had a passion for intellectual expansion. His peculiar gifts undoubtedly fitted him for the church, or he would have made a good professor at Oxford or Cambridge. But circumstances led him into the political arena, and he adapted himself readily to his environment. He was an all-round, well-read man, who thought his way through libraries and through life. One great benefit of a taste for reading and access to the book world is the service it renders as a diversion and a solace. What a great thing to be able to get away from ourselves, to fly away from the harassing, humiliating, discouraging, depressing things about us, to go at will to a world of beauty, joy, and gladness. If a person is discouraged or depressed by any great bereavement or suffering, the quickest and most effective way of restoring the mind to its perfect balance, to its normal condition, is to immerse it in a sane atmosphere, an uplifting, encouraging, inspiring atmosphere. And the most good in the world is found in the best books. I have known people who were suffering under the most painful mental anguish, from losses and shocks which almost unbalanced their minds, to be completely revolutionized in their mental state by the suggestive power which came from becoming absorbed in a great book. Everywhere we see rich old men sitting around the clubs, smoking, looking out of the windows, lounging around hotels, traveling about, uneasy, dissatisfied, not knowing what to do with themselves, because they had never prepared for this part of their lives. They put all their energy, ambition, everything into their vocation. I know an old gentleman who has been an exceedingly active businessman. He has kept his finger upon the pulse of events. He has known what has been going on in the world during his whole active career. And he is now as happy and as content as a child in his retirement, because he has always been a great reader, a great lover of his kind. People who keep their minds bent in one direction too long at a time soon lose their elasticity, their mental vigor, freshness, spontaneity. If I were to quote Mr. Dooley, it would be, "Reading is not thinking. Reading is the next thing this side of going to bed for resting the mind." To my own mind, however, I would rather cite that versatile Englishman, Lord Rosebery. In a speech at the opening of a Carnegie Library at West Calder, Midlothian, he made a characteristic utterance upon the value of books, saying in substance, "There is, however, one case in which books are certainly an end in themselves, and that is to refresh and to recruit after fatigue. When the object is to refresh and to exalt, to lose the cares of this world in the world of imagination, then the book is more than a means. It is an end in itself. It refreshes, exalts, and inspires the man. From any work, manual or intellectual, the man with a happy taste for books comes in tired and soured and falls into the arms of some great author, who raises him from the ground and takes him into a new heaven and a new earth, where he forgets his bruises and rests his limbs, and he returns to the world a fresh and happy man. Who, asks Professor Atkinson, can overestimate the value of good books, those strips of thought, as Bacon so finely calls them, voyaging through seas of time, and carrying their precious freight so safely from generation to generation? Here are finest minds giving us the best wisdom of present and past ages. Here are the intellects, gifted far beyond ours, ready to give us the results of lifetimes of patient thought, imaginations open to the beauty of the universe. The lover of good books can never be very lonely, and no matter where he is, he can always find pleasant and profitable occupation and the best of society when he quits work. Who can ever be grateful enough for the art of printing, grateful enough to the famous authors who have put their best thoughts where we can enjoy them at will? There are some advantages of intercourse with great minds through their books over meeting them in person. The best of them live in their books, while their disagreeable peculiarities, their idiosyncrasies, their objectionable traits are eliminated. In their books we find the authors at their best. Their thoughts are selected, winnowed in their books. Book friends are always at our service, never annoy us, rasp us, or nettle us. No matter how nervous, tired, or discouraged one may be, they are always soothing, stimulating, uplifting. We may call up the greatest writer in the middle of the night, when we cannot sleep, and he is just as glad to see us as at any other time. We are not excluded from any nook or corner in the great literary world. We can visit the most celebrated people that ever lived without an appointment, without influence, without the necessity of dressing or of observing any rules of etiquette. We can drop in upon a Milton, a Shakespeare, an Emerson, a Longfellow, a Whittier, without a moment's notice, and receive the warmest welcome. You get into society in the widest sense, says Geeky, in the great library, with the huge advantage of needing no introductions, and no dreading repulses. From that great crowd you can choose what companions you please, for in the silent levees of the immortals there is no pride, but the highest is at the service of the lowest, with a grand humility. You may speak freely with any, without a thought of your inferiority, for books are perfectly well bred, and hurt no one's feelings by any discriminations. It is not the number of books, says Professor William Matthews, which a young man reads that makes him intelligent and well informed, but the number of well-chosen ones that he has mastered, so that every valuable thought in them is a familiar friend. It is only when books have been read and reread with ever-deepening delight that they are clasped to the heart, and become what Macaulay found them to be, the old friends who are never found with new faces, who are the same to us in our wealth and in our poverty, in our glory and in our obscurity. No one gets into the inmost heart of a beautiful poem, a great history, a book of delicate humor, or a volume of exquisite essays by reading it once or twice. He must have its precious thoughts and illustrations stored in the treasure house of memory, and brood over them in the hours of leisure. A book may be a perpetual companion. Friends come and go, but the book may beguile all experiences and enchant all hours. The first time, says Goldsmith, that I read an excellent book, it is to me just as if I had gained a new friend. When I read over a book I have perused before, it resembles the meeting with an old one. No matter how poor I am, says William Ellery Channing, no matter though the prosperous of my own time will not enter my obscure dwelling, if the sacred writers will enter and take up their abode under my roof, if Milton will cross my threshold to sing to me of paradise, and Shakespeare to open to me the worlds of imagination and the workings of the human heart, I shall not pine for want of intellectual companionship, though excluded from what is called the best society in the places where I live. Books, says Milton, do preserve, as in a viol, the purest efficacy and extraction of that living intellect that bred them. A good book is the precious lifeblood of a master spirit, embalmed and treasured up on purpose to a life beyond life. A book is good company, said Henry Ward Beecher. It comes to your longing with full instruction, but pursues you never. It is not offended at your absent-mindedness, nor jealous if you turn to other pleasures, of leaf, or dress, or mineral, or even of books. It silently serves the soul without recompense, not even for the hire of love. And yet more noble, it seems to pass from itself, and to enter the memory, and to hover in a silvery transformation there, until the outward book is but a body, and its soul and spirit are flown to you, and possess your memory like a spirit. End of Chapter 62. A College Education at Home. Chapter 63 of Pushing to the Front by Orison Swett Marden. Discrimination in reading. A few books well read, and an intelligent choice of those few. These are the fundamentals for self-education by reading. If only a few well chosen, it is better to avail yourself of choices others have already made, old books, the standard works tested by many generations of readers. If only a few, let them be books of highest character and established fame. Such books are easily found even in small public libraries. For the purpose of this chapter, which is to aid in forming a taste for reading, there should be no confusion of choice by naming too many books of one author. If you read one and like it, you can easily find another. It is a cardinal rule that if you do not like a book, do not read it. What another likes, you may not. Any book list is suggestive. It can be binding only on those who prize it. Like attracts like. Did you ever think that the thing you are looking for is looking for you, that it is the very law of affinities to get together? If you are coarse in your tastes, vicious in your tendencies, you do not have to work very hard to find coarse, vicious books. They are seeking you by the very law of attraction. One's taste for reading is much like his taste for food. Dull books are to be avoided, as one refuses food disagreeable to him. To someone else the book may not be dull, nor the food disagreeable. Whole nations may eat cabbage or stale fish, while I like neither. Ultimately, therefore, every reader must make his own selection and find the books that find him. Any one, not a random reader, will soon select a short shelf of books that he may like better than a longer shelf that exactly suits someone else. Either will be a shelf of good books, neither a shelf of the best books, since if best for you or me, they may not be best for everybody. A most learned man in India, in turning the leaves of a book as he read, felt a little prick in his finger. A tiny snake dropped out and wriggled out of sight. The pundit's finger began to swell, then his arm, and in an hour he was dead. Who has not noticed in the home a snake in a book that has changed the character of a boy through its moral poison, so that he was never quite the same again? How well did Carlyle divide books into sheeps and goats? It is probable that the careers of the majority of criminals in our prisons today might have been vastly different if the character of their reading when young had been different, had it been uplifting, wholesome, instead of degrading. Christian Endeavor clerk read a notice conspicuously posted in a large city. All boys should read the wonderful story of the Desperado brothers of the Western Plains, whose strange and thrilling adventures of successful robbery and murder have never before been equaled. Price, 5 cents. The next morning, Dr. Clark read in a newspaper of that city that 7 boys had been arrested for burglary and 4 stores broken into by the gang. One of the ringleaders was only 10 years old. At their trial, it appeared that each had invested 5 cents in the story of border crime. Red-eyed Dick, the terror of the Rockies, or some such story, had poisoned many a lad's life. A seductive, demoralizing book destroys the ambition unless for vicious living. All that was sweet, beautiful, and wholesome in the character before seems to vanish, and everything changes after the reading of a single bad book. It has aroused the appetite for more forbidden pleasures, until it crowds out the desire for everything better, purer, healthier. Mental dissipation from this exciting literature, often dripping with suggestiveness of impurity, giving a passport to the prohibited. This is fatal to all soundness of mind. A lad once showed to another a book full of words and pictures of impurity. He only had it in his hands a few moments. Later in life he held high office in the church, and years afterward told a friend that he would have given half he possessed had he never seen it. Light, flashy stories, with no intention in them, seriously injured the mind of a brilliant young lady I once knew. Like the drug fiend whose brain has been stupefied, her brain became completely demoralized by constant mental dissipation. Familiarity with the bad ruins the taste for the good. Her ambition and ideas of life became completely changed. Her only enjoyment was the excitement of her imagination through vicious books. Nothing else will more quickly injure a good mind than familiarity with the frivolous, the superficial. Even though they may not be actually vicious, the reading of books which are not true to life, which carry home no great lesson, teach no sane or healthful philosophy, but are merely written to excite the passions, to stimulate a morbid curiosity, will ruin the best of minds in a very short time. It tends to destroy the ideals, and to ruin the taste for all good reading. Read all you can, but never read a bad book or a poor book. Life is too short, time too precious, to spend it in reading anything but the best. Any book is bad for you, the reading of which takes away your desire for a better one. Many people still hold that it is a bad thing for the young to read works of fiction. They believe that young minds get a moral twist from reading that which they know is not true, the descriptions of mere imaginary heroes and heroines, and of things which never happened. Now this is a very narrow, limited view of a big question. These people do not understand the office of the imagination. They do not realize that many of the fictitious heroes and heroines that live in our minds, even from childhood's days, are much more real in their influence on our lives than some of those that exist in flesh and blood. Dickens' marvelous characters seem more real to us than any we have ever met. They have followed millions of people from childhood to old age and influenced their whole lives for good. Many of us would look upon it as a great calamity to have these characters of fiction blotted out of our memory and their influence taken out of our lives. Readers are sometimes so wrought up by a good work of fiction, their minds are raised to such a pitch of courage and daring, all their faculties so sharpened and braced, their whole nature so stimulated, that they can for the time being attempt and accomplish things which were impossible to them without the stimulus. This, it seems to me, is one of the great values of fiction. If it is good and elevating, it is a splendid exercise of all the mental and moral faculties. It increases courage, it rouses enthusiasm, it sweeps the brain ash off the mind, and actually strengthens its ability to grasp new principles and to grapple with the difficulties of life. Many a discouraged soul has been refreshed, reinvigorated, has taken on new life by the reading of a good romance. I recall a bit of fiction called The Magic Story, which has helped thousands of discouraged souls, given them new hope, new life, when they were ready to give up the struggle. The reading of good fiction is a splendid imagination exerciser and builder. It stimulates it by suggestions, powerfully increases its picturing capacity, and keeps it fresh and vigorous and wholesome. And a wholesome imagination plays a very great part in every sane and worthy life. It makes it possible for us to shut out the most disagreeable past, to shut out at will all hideous memories of our mistakes, failures, and misfortunes. It helps us to forget our trouble and sorrows and to slip at will into a new, fresh world of our own making, a world which we can make as beautiful, as sublime, as we wish. The imagination is a wonderful substitute for wealth, luxuries, and for material things. No matter how poor we may be, or how unfortunate, we may be bedridden even, we can by its aid travel around the world, visit its greatest cities, and create the most beautiful things for ourselves. Sir John Herschel tells an amusing anecdote illustrating the pleasure derived from a book, not assuredly of the first order. In a certain village, the blacksmith had got hold of Richardson's novel, Pamela, or Virtue Rewarded, and used to sit on his anvil in the long summer evenings and read it aloud to a large and attentive audience. It is by no means a short book, but they fairly listened to it all. At length, when the happy turn of fortune arrived, which brings the hero and heroine together, and sets them living long and happily according to the most approved rules, the congregation was so delighted as to raise a great shout, and, procuring the church keys, actually set the parish bells ringing. "It all comes back to us now," said the brilliant editor of the Interior not long ago. "That winter evening in the old home. The curtains are down, the fire is sending out a cheerful warmth, and the shaded lamps diffusing a well-tempered radiance. The lad of 15 is bent over a borrowed volume of Sea Tales. For hours he reads on, oblivious of all surroundings, until parental attention is drawn toward him by the unusual silence. The boy is seen to be trembling from head to foot with suppressed excitement. A fatherly hand is laid upon the volume, closing it firmly, and the edict is spoken: 'No more novels for 5 years.' And the lad goes off to bed, half glad, half grieved, wondering whether he had found fetters or achieved freedom. In truth, he had received both, for that indiscriminating command forbade to him during a formative period of his life works which would have kindled his imagination, enriched his fancy, and heightened his power of expression. But if it closed to him the garden of Hesperides, it also saved him from a possible descent to the inferno. It made heroes of history, not demigods of mythology, his companions, and reserved to maturer years those excursions in the literature of the imagination which may lead a young man up to heaven or as easily drag him down to hell. The boy who is permitted to saturate his mind with stories of battle, murder, and sudden death is fitting himself, as the records of our juvenile courts show, for the penitentiary or perhaps the gallows. No man can handle pitch without defilement. We may choose our books, but we cannot choose their effects. We may plant the vine or sow the thistle, but we cannot command what fruit each shall bear. We may loosely select our library, but by and by it will fit us close as a glove. There was never such a demand for fiction as now, and never larger opportunities for its usefulness. Nothing has such an attraction for life as life. For what the heart craves is not life as it is. It is life as it ought to be. We want not the feeble, but the forceful, not the commonplace, but the transcendent. Nobody objects to the purpose novel except those who object to the purpose. Dueling as it does in the hands of a great master, with the grandest passions, the most tender emotions, the divinest hopes, it can portray all of these spiritual forces in their majestic sweep and uplift. And as a matter of history, we have seen the novel achieve in a single generation the task at which the homily had labored ineffectively for 100 years. Realizing this, it is safe to say that there is not a theory of the philosopher, a hope of the reformer, or a prayer of the saint which does not eventually take form in a story. The novel has wings, while logic plods with a staff. In the hour it takes the metaphysician to define his premises, the storyteller has reached the goal, and after him tumbles the crowd tumultuous. With the assistance of Reverend Dr. E. P. Tenney, I venture upon the following list of books in various lines of reading. Fiction. The Arabian Nights Entertainment. Stories from the Arabian Nights, Riverside School Library. Contains many of the more famous stories. 50C. Irving Bachelder's, transcriber's note, Bachelor, Eben Holden, is a good book. 400,000 copies were sold. J. M. Barrie's Little Minister, a story of Scottish life, is very bright reading. Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress is one of the most famous of allegories. Cervantes' Don Quixote is so widely known that any well-read man should know it. Its humor never grows old. Ralph Connor's 3 books, The Man from Glengarry, Black Rock, and The Sky Pilot, have sold 400,000 copies. Of George W. Cable's books, The Cavalier and Old Creole Days are among the best. Dinah Mulock Craik's John Halifax, Gentleman, is of rare merit. C. E. Craddock's pseudonym In the Tennessee Mountains is entertaining, a powerful story of mountain life. Of F. Marion Crawford's stories, among the best are Mr. Isaacs and A Roman Singer. Alexander Dumas's Count of Monte Cristo is a world-famous romance. Of George Eliot, Silas Marner is the best of the short stories, and Romola the best of the long. Adam Bede ranks barely second to Silas Marner. Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre remains a classic among early English novels. Edward Everett Hale's Man Without a Country will be read as long as the American flag flies. Hawthorne's Mosses from an Old Manse are stories of unique interest, and The Scarlet Letter is known to all well-read people. Of Rudyard Kipling, read Kim and The Man Who Would Be King. Pierre Loti's Iceland Fisherman is translated by A. F. D. Coven, McClurg, $1. S. Wyer Mitchell's Hugh Wynne sold 125,000 copies. Thomas Nelson Page's Gordon Keith sold 200,000 copies. If you read only one of Walter Scott's novels, take Ivanhoe or The Talisman. 5 more of those most read are likely to follow. Henryk Sienkiewicz's Quo Vadis is most notable. Robert L. Stevenson's Treasure Island and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and The Merry Men and Other Tales are fair examples of the charm and insight of this author. He who reads Frank Stockton's Rudder Grange is likely to read more of this author's books. Mrs. H. B. Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin is still one of the great stories of the world. Of Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn, The Innocents Abroad, and The Story of Joan of Arc are representative volumes. Miss Warner's Wide, Wide World is unique in American fiction. John Watson's Beside the Bonnie Briar Bush sold 200,000 copies in America. Lew Wallace's Ben-Hur is the greatest of scriptural romances. 38 books by 28 authors. It would have been easier to name 100 authors and 200 books. I will add from The Critic a list whose sales have reached 6 figures. Books of Everyday Life. David Harum by Westcott, 727,000. Mrs. Wiggs of the Cabbage Patch by Alice Hegan Rice, 345,000. The Virginian by Owen Wister, 250,000. Lovely Mary by Alice Hegan Rice, 188,000. The Birds, Christmas Carol by Mrs. Wiggin, 100,000. The Story of Patsy by Mrs. Wiggin, 100,000. The Leopard Spots by Thomas G. Dixon, Jr., 125,000. Romantic. Richard Carvel by Winston Churchill, 400,000. The Crisis by Winston Churchill, 400,000. Graustark by G. B. McCutcheon, 300,000. The Eternal City by Hall Caine, 175,000. Dorothy Vernon by Charles Major, 150,000. The Manx Man by Hall Caine, 113,000. When Knighthood Was in Flower by Charles Major, 400,000. To Have and to Hold by Miss Johnston, 300,000. Audrey by Miss Johnston, 165,000. The Helmet of Navarre by Bertha Runkle. End of Chapter 63. Discrimination in Reading.